Greetings. Welcome to Chapter 17, where we will be covering interrogative and indefinite pronouns. On your screen you see we have Polly pronoun back, and Polly is going to introduce us to the different types of pronouns that exist. Interrogative pronouns, as we're going to learn now, are pronouns that ask questions. We have them in English as well as in Greek. In English, these are the questions of who, what, and why. And we see these show up quite a bit in our English sentences, and you're going to see them now coming up in Greek for asking questions. But Greek also has indefinite pronouns as we do in English. In English, we would actually refer to these as something that actually tells us about the unspecified subject. It identifies somebody or someone or something. So quite often in Greek you'll see we're going to actually translate it as someone, something, or a certain one. Now, before I actually go in and show you how to use these different pronouns, let's go in and take a look at the paradigm that we have. On your screen, we have the paradigm for the interrogative pronoun. Notice that these are the pronouns that ask questions: who, what, and why. Notice that when we look at the top of the paradigm, we notice that the masculine and the feminine are both exactly the same, while the neuter has its own individual form. Notice also that all of these pronouns take a case: nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative, as you've already seen. Now, why do we have masculine and feminine in the same column? That's because when we ask the question who or whom, we actually do not distinguish between male or female, that is, or masculine or feminine. The word who or whom works for either one, so that's why we have one column for masculine and feminine. But under the neuter, we would actually reserve that column for when we ask the question of what. We'll explain these through examples in just a moment. Now, let's take a look at the paradigm for the indefinite pronoun. Here is the paradigm for the indefinite pronoun, and this is how one says in Greek someone or something or a certain one or a certain thing. Notice again we have both the singular and the plural up here, just as we did before. Notice also that again we have our case system, the nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative, and that we have masculine, feminine once again is in one column and the neuter in another. Also, notice that because we have masculine and feminine in one column, this would be those times we would say someone or a certain one, okay? Or if it was plural, we would say certain ones. Again, because in masculine and feminine, we don't have to actually distinguish between that when we are asking the question. But if we were actually using the neuter, then we could simply say either something or even anything. We could also say in the masculine feminine column anyone or anything. Now, let's just take a look at a few things that we want to observe about this paradigm. If you want to pause, and you could open up your book to page 235 and 236, and you can look at the two paradigms that we have, the one for the interrogative, the one for the indefinite. You'll notice, however, that in the book, rather than separate them the way that I have, they actually display them right next to each other. All right, they display the singular on page 235, both the interrogative and the indefinite, and the plural on page 236, the interrogative and the indefinite. And with those paradigms in mind, this is what we notice here as we observe a few things. First of all, both of these paradigms are following the third declension noun pattern, which means, for instance, that our genitive is going to have the omicron sigma ending that we've already seen in the third declension. It also means that our genitive will have an iota as a indicator that we are dealing with the iota, or excuse me, the dative case. Both the interrogative and the indefinite pronoun look exactly the same. When you look at them, this is why Story has placed the singular and the plural side by side for both the interrogative and the indefinite pronoun. He lets you see that they are both formed exactly the same way. The only difference, however, as you look closely, is that between the two paradigms, you notice that the interrogative has the accent mark on the first syllable, while the indefinite pronoun has the accent mark on the second syllable. Now, while it's displayed this way, this could actually be a little deceiving, because it might lead you to believe that if you just follow and figure out where that accent is, you'll know whether or not you're actually asking a question or pointing out the indefinite subject. The problem is this: one cannot depend on the accent marks, because depending upon how the interrogative or the indefinite pronoun appears in a sentence, the accent mark position changes. So rather than actually pay attention to the accent mark, something that I've told you not to worry about so far in this class, I want to give you a hint, and that is this: look for the presence of a question mark at the end of the sentence. What that means is that when you start parsing out your sentence, you'll notice that you've got a pronoun there that's either an interrogative or an indefinite. And so when you see that, you will then take that into consideration, thinking, okay, is this actually asking a question, or is it identifying an unknown subject? And then when you get to the end of the sentence, when you see your question mark, then you'll know. If it has a question mark, then you know that it's asking the question who or what. If there is no question, then you know that it is saying about someone or something. Now, as we continue to move on, let's take a look at some examples of this. These are some practices that I've taken from page 237 in your book, and these come right from our New Testament. The first one on your screen there, tis estin hutas hawias tu anthropou. Now the tis at the front, tells me that this could be either an interrogative or an indefinite pronoun. And the fact that the accent mark is apparent there on that syllable could actually tell me, okay, this is an interrogative, that is, it's asking a question. But even more important than that, when I look at the end of my sentence, at the end of anthropou, I see, which of course in English is our semicolon, I see what's the equivalent of the Greek question mark. So I now know that the tis, that is the pronoun at the front, is actually asking a question. And the question here is, who is this Son of Man? Okay, so now I've been able to ask a question. Who is this Son of Man? Let's take a look at another example that we have here. Ti autou akuata. Ti, okay. When we look at that, we see now that this is a pronoun that's either asking a question or identifying an indefinite subject. But when I look at the end of akuata, okay, I see that it is actually asking a question. And so this is asking either a who, a what, or a why. The fact that it is the T, when I look at my paradigm, you can look at yours if you like on page 235, I know that it's in the neuter. So therefore, it's not asking a question of who, because it's in the neuter, but it's actually asking a question of what or why. So we could, when we look at this, we say, okay, Ti autou akuata. Well, let's see if it says what. What of him, because I have my genitive pronoun there, what of him do you hear? Or perhaps better, why of him do you hear? Or probably in better English, why do you listen to him? As we've seen with a number of other things so far this term in Greek, at times there's a little requirement of skill in the area of how we nuance our translation. Technically in Greek, the why are you listening of him works pretty well and we can understand it, but in English it sounds much better if we say, why do you listen to him? Next, igrapsa ti te ekklesia. Igrapsa ti te ekklesia. Alright, I have the ti. One thing that's very helpful for here is that the fact that my pronoun here, whether it's interrogative or indefinite, actually does not appear at the beginning of the sentence, unlike the previous two examples. That's another hint for you that you're dealing with an interrogative, that is a pronoun that asks a question, is that when it begins at the beginning of a sentence, there's a good chance it's asking a question, but not always.
In this case, egrapsate te ecclesia. I wrote, I could say someone or something to the church. And of course, if I'm writing to the church, I would probably want to say egrapsate te ecclesia. I wrote something to the church. Okay? Or you could even say I wrote a certain thing to the church. Here's a final example we'll look at here before we move on. Kai tines ex auton episteson. Kai tinas, there is no question mark at the end of this, so I know it's not a question. It begins with a kai, and the pronoun is not at the beginning of a sentence, so there's a good chance here it's not a question. And so in this case, I would actually translate this as and certain ones of them, because this is my tines. I know that this is, looking at the paradigm on 236, this is a masculine or feminine plural neuter. And so I would translate this as either and certain ones of them, or certain men of them, or certain men among them were persuaded. I would say in this translation, and certain ones of them were persuaded. All right, moving on. In addition to the interrogative and the indefinite pronouns, there's another type of pronoun that we run across in Greek that also appears in English, and that is the relative pronoun. Now, relative pronouns relate one part of a sentence to another. Let me give you an example in English. We find that relative pronouns connect English sentences together with the words whom, who, whom, or even which. And so in this sentence, I saw the man whom Jesus healed. We could simply say, I saw the man. We could even simply say, Jesus healed. But by using the relative pronoun whom, we're actually able to connect the two parts of the sentence together as, I saw the man whom Jesus healed. Looking at the next one, we see, we heard the words which Paul spoke. Again, we could simply say, we heard the words, and we could also just simply say, Paul spoke. But we're able to join the two parts of the sentence together with the relative pronoun which. In English, we end up with the sentence, we heard the words which Paul spoke. With that in mind now, let's take a look at the paradigm for the relative pronoun. When you look at this paradigm, you should notice right away that this is very familiar to you. Okay? Notice that it follows the same exact pattern of the definite article. The only difference that you're going to have here is the fact that you are actually dealing with definite articles in the genitive and on without the tau. Because normally what you would have in the genitive would be tu, taste tu, rather than simply u, ace, u. In reality, they look a lot like the endings, but they're all that 2-1-2 pattern that you are so used to. Okay? Notice, too, that in addition to that, while the nominatives may all look like the definite article, like has or ha, he, ta, notice that they're not exactly the same, and also notice that all of them have a rough breathing. So it's not just simply as, a, it's has, he, ha, and it's not simply u, ace, u, it's hu, hace, hu, or ho, he, ho, okay, or han, hain, ha in the accusative singular. And so these are your relative pronouns, and it's how you introduce the word which, okay, or who into a sentence. Let's take a look at some examples that we have on page 238 in your textbook. On the screen we have Amy, ha, Amy. Amy, of course, meaning I am. And then we have also on the screen there, we have the relative pronoun ha, okay, and then we have again Amy. So in this case, I would translate this as I am what I am, from 1 Corinthians 15:10, where Paul says that, I am what I am. Okay, so in this case, you translate the ha simply as what. In this next sentence, we have he entole, meaning the commandment. He entole estin halagas han akusata. The commandment is the word, and then there's our relative pronoun han, okay, that we have there. The commandment is the word which you heard. Okay? The commandment is the word which you heard. That's from 1 John chapter 2, verse 7. Finally, sometimes you'll have a relative pronoun, and it actually will show up with one of your red flag words. You can see this on page 238. Story actually lists out 3 possible combinations, and I've already introduced to you this combination at an earlier point when we went over the subjunctive, but now I'm actually introducing you to the relative pronoun so you understand that aspect of it. So here we have haeon aitomen, lambanomen apo autu. Notice that with the haeon we're actually introducing a red flag word. So we know that that's subjunctive. So notice that aitomen from aiteo has the elongated omega, telling us it's a subjunctive. So we know it's a, quote, present active subjunctive, first person plural. So then we would actually translate this as whatever we ask, or if we want to be very wooden with the subjunctive, whatever we should ask, we receive from him. 1 John chapter 3, verse 22. All right, well, that's a very easy lesson for you this week. There are some small items that you'll want to read up about adverbs that I'm not going to go over here today. You can see that on page 239 in your book. In preparation then for your class, I'd ask that you please learn the vocabulary for chapter 17. Memorize the various pronouns and their uses, and then of course complete at least 10 of the chapter 17 practice sentences in the workbook. All right, thank you so much.